Okay, thank you for being on the first live podcast, or the second live podcast we've done since COVID.
Oh, okay, no pressure.
But the first one we've done in like a long time. So I'm really grateful you could come out. So meeting aliens on meth P. I just want to start with that. Let's just get straight to it. Okay. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about alien schools in higher dimensions that you meet through hard drugs, please.
Okay, all right, right into it. I have this same stool from Target. This is from Target. I like it. And then there's just kind of standard stuff I've noticed. It's, do we all just have our windowsills lined?
We're all mass-produced people.
Yeah, we are just the same person. Okay, well, a little bit behind the scenes of how the sausage is made is meth P, required me to consolidate a lot of experiences. So I didn't actually meet aliens on meth P, but it did happen around that era of time. I did meth from the time I was 22 until, 28 or something. And about a year in, January of 2000, I had a near-death experience, which was, who knows what it was caused by, GHB, maybe somebody trying to kill me, something.
Oh God, that's dark.
Yeah,
that's dark.
It's really
when it's like GHB is like, when you're taking like that's made for cleaning hubcaps, right?
Oh, well, GHB I took on purpose. That I took on purpose, but it's a toss-up.
Someone I met told me it was really fun, but yeah.
Yeah, it is fun, but it is really a crapshoot of whether or not that capful is gonna send you to another dimension. But I woke up, I haven't told the story in a long time. I woke up in just a blue light. I died at a club called the Ohm.
As you do.
Because reality's not real. And I woke up in a blue ball of light. I don't even know how I knew it was a ball. It was just a blue room. And back then, the only way I could describe it is when the DVD player or the VCR was like off, but you still had it on that channel. It was that color blue. And I didn't have a body, and I was a part of this thing, but I was also myself. I would now describe that as 8-dimensional reality, but I had no way to describe any of this back then.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And then the thing communicated with me without words, but then my brain translated it to words when I came back, and it was essentially like, you could stay here if you want. Like, you learned everything you had to learn. You did everything you had to do, like whatever you came to do in this lifetime. So you can stay here if you want, which was like the best Molly. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Just like rolling vibration, kind of orgasmic. I'm sure it gets old after a little while, but I was feeling it in this moment. And it said you could stay here, which seemed like the good option. Like the way they presented it was like, you could have this ice cream sundae, but we could really use you eating the liver, if you don't mind.
Was it like a gamble? Like it's kind of like you can double down on the table now that you've won, but you might lose everything type of thing?
Ooh, that's a good way to describe it. No, it kind of seemed like I had some sort of, I don't know, contract, or I don't know. It was like, hey, we've prepared you. Now I would say it was like, hey, we've kind of watched you. We've prepared you for this moment. You want to go do this thing. So they said, the awareness said, we could use your help. You have a job for you if you want to take the job. And it was about helping people. And I said, what people? And then it took me back to my present moment where I'm in a hospital. It shows me the people that, I didn't go on to help. But so I ended up saying yes. And both times I went back into my body, I had to live my entire life to get to the present moment, which I don't know if that's what people are describing as your life flashing before your eyes. I pictured that like a movie,
Was it really fast or like super in real time? Okay,
but I was like, so when I woke up, I was sucking my thumb because I was a baby a millisecond ago. And I was immediately, and whatever, I'm like a year into meth addiction now. So we're all a little unhinged. And I'm so grateful after watching people go through an awakening in a normal life. I'm so grateful. I was with meth addicts. My God. Because, I was wacky for the next few years, but, Nobody was. Anyway, so we're in the Jack in the Box drive-through after the hospital, and I'm like, I met God. And at this time, I believe myself to be a backslidden Christian because I had done a 5-year stint in Christianity before comedy and then meth. And I'm driving everyone nuts. I'm like, I met God. Reality's not what we think it is. And a lot of this wasn't said to me. I just came back knowing. I suddenly knew things. And when I first woke up in the hospital, I could hear the thoughts of, and do you hear thoughts?
At times. Sure.
Yeah. So, it's not like words in your head, but you can feel the subtext.
I try not to.
Yeah. I wish I could turn it off. So I was just suddenly aware of things and I could see things. You know how when you go through like an awakening, suddenly the world looks like a movie set, or some sort of glitching video game. And I went back to a house. I got left alone at this house for 5 days. And in those 5 days, started what I call alien school. I think I stole that from Tim Dillon, called me that on a podcast. But
you were going to start an alien school, or you were in alien school?
Alien school. I told this story once on a different podcast, and they named the episode Alien School. And then I was like, oh, that's really good. So that's not mine. I took it. But it felt very much like school. And I've heard other people describe this where your dreams take place. It looks like an empty, abandoned school, kind of like a school at summertime when there's no classes there. And that's where the aliens came in. And I didn't have any typical, it was just in my dreams. And they look pretty standard alien-ish, but they're like, you could put your finger through them. I don't think they would want you to but they're like.
That would only be fair after they do it to us. So
yeah. They were like plasma, which I guess is a thing. But anyway, so they're like vibrating energy. They didn't have feet. That was one thing, that they like float and their feet kind of taper off at the bottom. And they taught me a bunch of stuff about how reality actually works. And the gist was just that reality's a video game. Sorry, can I put my phone on this?
Yeah.
Reality's a video game, essentially, for lack of a better word. It is some sort of immersive experience thing. And that the experience that we've been having is switching to a different experience. And I didn't have categories of reason for a lot of this stuff when they were describing it to me. And now 20 years later, I'm like, oh, that's what that meant. Oh, that's what that meant. But it was basically the end of duality, I guess, like the end of they called it parameters. I guess now we would call it constructs of right and wrong would cease to exist, light and dark would cease to exist, male and female would cease to exist. And now I see the disillusion of these boundaries as we are realizing that we all have masculine and feminine energy, and that light and dark are two ends of the same spectrum rather than two opposite, separate things. And they said we were in a 3D fear-based reality, and we were going into a higher dimensional, feminine, which I now would know means like receptive, creative, reality based on love, which is what we're all calling 5D now, So it's hard now because I've taken in all this new awareness. So I'm trying to get back to what they specifically said back then. But so then I was really bummed after about 6 months that I didn't stay in not even 6 months, probably a couple months, that I didn't stay in the blue ball of light. Felt like a huge mistake. You mean
after coming back down and just dealing with reality?
Yeah. Yeah. You have this impression that all I have to do is tell everyone this isn't real. And then they're going to be like, oh God, okay. Because you have this impression that you're going to have community and that people are going to. That's a funny one, right? And then you find out this is the most isolating experience of your entire life, even when the other people are high on meth. So I couldn't make anyone else see it. I couldn't articulate it to anyone. I would point it out. And I think that I was waiting for this my entire life. I think when I was young, reality didn't ever feel right to me what people said it was. It seemed insane. You know, when you start to learn like, oh, Santa Claus isn't real, the Easter Bunny's not real, magic's not real. I was like, magic's not real. That one doesn't seem true. I don't think I ever bought into Santa.
That's not true. So
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I felt like I was looking for the curtain my whole life. And there was something very sad to me about people believing that life's about get a house, get a job, get a partner, eke out your existence. It never felt true to me. So as soon as I got this information, I was like, okay, cool. I've been waiting for this. I just got to let everyone know. And then no one gave a shit. And reality was hard. I was a drug addict, you know, and I felt alone, very, very alone. So I tried to get back to the blue ball of light. I made a couple attempts to exit.
And how did you make these attempts?
I hung myself and I took a bottle of pills. And I remember there being more attempts, or I remember saying there were more attempts, but those are the only two I remember. I don't have a great memory, and I got Lyme disease in 2020, which really wiped my memory. So this is who knows at this point. I'm just trying to remember the story, but I don't have the memory of the actual events anymore. But neither of those things worked. Have you ever seen Russian Doll?
Yeah.
So that's exactly why I just like Russian dolled.
How do you mean?
I woke up I hung myself in a bathroom and I woke up. This is a little dark. Sorry.
It's okay.
I woke up in bed. And I didn't understand timelines. I didn't understand what timelines were.
Like in a new layer of reality?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would now say I jumped timelines.
Okay.
So now I believe, and I know a lot of people who've had similar experiences, I think that when you try to exit the matrix that way, you may leave the people behind on that timeline. So you might hurt the people that are there, but you don't actually get to leave.
Maybe, although I'm not going to test the theory.
Yeah, no, let's not. And that's just those are my experiences, but I know several other people who have made real earnest attempts to get out that way. I think that initially I had an exit because I did everything I had to do and I learned everything I had to learn on that one. But then I signed a new contract. Oh, yes. I entered a new thing and they were like, no, you can't.
It's like a new tour of military duty.
You can't. You don't actually get to go anywhere. So yeah, there are now understanding what I do about timeline shifts and stuff. I can go, okay, that was a timeline shift. But at the time I was just like, oh, I can't die. So then I spent months desperately trying to figure out who I was, what this was. I had the sensation that I was something important. I went back to the club and there was, when they turned the lights on at the end of the night, there was a pendant at my toe that had the goddess Athena on one side and an owl on the other side. And then I don't know anything about anything. I failed every single grade in school. I have very little information in my head from the world I actually live in. So I asked a tweaker, what is this? And they said, that's Osiris. And so then I spent years believing that I must be somehow connected.
Well, here's an interesting thing, right? You may have heard this or not. Owls in the alien contact literature are a classic symbol of aliens and people who have had alien abduction experiences, but then perhaps blocked them out, see owls everywhere. And the theory is that they look like gray aliens, kind of. So it's like it's a repeating symbol with people who have had that experience, apparently.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, little tidbit of info.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, I feel very connected to owls, and there was a little thing where I tried to reanimate one with meth, but that's a story for another day.
Okay.
So I spent time trying to figure out if I was Osiris. It's just that thing, where you wake up and you go, well, there's a mystery here to be solved, and you start chasing it in all kinds of wacky directions. And I developed a lot of supernatural powers, but I was also on meth and I was around people who were on meth pretty exclusively. I was like completely outside of society, which I'm very grateful for. I at one point felt so desperate to figure out what I was. I applied for a job. I'm living in Portland also. So Portland was like ground zero for,
It's ground zero for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, have you ever seen that movie Spun? that came out, and that is, I think, like the best depiction of that reality. It was like so perfect. Yeah, just as an aside for people who don't know that mentality.
I feel like Spawn led a little bit to me getting clean, because I watched it towards the end of, there was about 5 months, I guess, where I was preparing to get clean and I didn't know it. And Spawn came out and I was just like, God, yuck. That's what we are.
It's a very good depiction, I think.
I went to a job interview at a place called Worth on Earth Energy Center. And for a intuitive counselor, which is weirdly kind of what I am now. And I got to the interview and I just said, listen, I'm pretty sure I can do whatever this job says, but I more or less just need to talk to someone. I need to figure out what is happening to me. And I listed all of this stuff and she said, well, it sounds like you're a walk-in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then she explained what a walk-in is, essentially.
Do you want to maybe explain that for the audience or people who haven't heard that concept?
Yeah, I may butcher it, but essentially a person dies and then they hand their life and body over to an other dimensional. I feel like higher dimensional leads to this kind of hierarchy shit we're trying to get away from, but another being to take over and use. And I'm still here, I think, but there definitely was an aspect of me that showed up that is capable in ways that I was never capable, and understood and knew things in a way that I never knew them. And when I relate back to how my entire life was up until this point, I do feel like I was kind of guided or watched. When I was a kid, I understood the stars to be an audience and my life to be some sort of TV show. And I showered with the lights off. Like I wouldn't take my clothes off with the lights on until I was, an adult. And this all kind of makes sense when I look at it that way. And that, these, whatever this is, I understand it to be some sort of immersive video game. And that this consciousness that wanted to come carry this thing out was like, well, I'm not sitting through 18 years of fucking school or whatever. Not that I did. So, that helped a little bit. I finished what we're calling alien school after about 5 years.
Do you know Whitley Strieber?
Mm-mm.
He wrote the book Communion in the 80s, which is where the classic gray alien image came from. They made a movie out of it with Christopher Walken. It was so famous in the 80s. Everyone was reading it. And he was on Larry King. He was a horror writer who wrote the books that actually the movies Wolfen and The Hunger were based on. But then in the mid-80s, he claimed that, no, he actually had been abducted by aliens, and he wrote a book about it. Nobody took him serious because he was a horror writer, and they were like, okay, this is a trick. But no, he was totally serious. And he became kind of like a bit object of fascination and / laughing stock in the 80s. He's still writing books, but I talked to him on his podcast a couple years ago, and it was a really interesting conversation. And he was talking about alien schools and how a big part of aliens, he believes, is that they do have schools that they're educating people in. And I asked him, okay, but are there competing alien schools? And he didn't have an answer for that. I don't think he thought about that before. And he was like, okay, that's actually interesting, because I was kind of interacting with him from the occult angle and relating his alien, because I haven't had at least traditional type of alien experiences like that, but I was relating it to occult experiences and talking about things from occult history as well. And there were like a ton of overlaps between some classic occult experiences like those of John Dee and Jack Parsons with the things that he had experienced. And reading his alien contact experiences, they sounded very much not stereotypical. They were very much more like more occult and interacting with, like, he refers to them as dwarves, and so he would see like hairy aliens that look like something from medieval literature, and it was like it's much stranger than people depicted it. But I was like noticing all these overlaps, and he had not before, because he's not familiar with the occult literature. So, but I just wanted to bring that into the conversation, because it seems like a lot of the things you're talking about are repeating themes between people who have experiences like this. So for instance, the school, the needing to tell people about it, the higher dimensionality, the collapse of paradoxes or dualities, and just pointing that out. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think at this point, and I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are at this point. It's like the longer I'm looking at this stuff and talking about this stuff, and I didn't start publicly talking about it until 2019. I feel like it's all the same shit, or it's because my experience with aliens definitely doesn't resonate with what I think I hear other people talking about aliens. Like they're not from another planet. I would say now we're aliens. Like we are not, like we're having a human experience, but this container that we're in is not where we're at. That's what it feels like to me. Like I'm in a room somewhere with a VR mask on, and not that literally, but that's the closest I can come to an allegory for what's happening. And the aliens that I came in contact with were just, I don't know, disembodied spirits, but also there are, like, now at this point, I can see anything that's in the ether, right? So there's all kinds of shit walking.
Like what?
Things that look like dinosaurs, things that look like Bigfoot, tall aliens, things with no heads, I have to sleep with the lights on because all kinds of things with their heads on fire, very DMT stuff. When I finally did DMT, I was like, oh, this is just kind of what I see running in the background at all times. So it's all here. So we're not separate from it. This is why you can't talk about this shit at some point, because it's like
it's normal for me, but that's I'm an odd case.
Yeah, I mean, not because it's
living.
Weird, but just because it's everything. It's everything and nothing. That it gets harder and harder to put it into boxes. But yeah, I at the beginning thought that I had some grand calling to awaken humanity, and I thought it was going to be some sort of jump cut into utopia, and I thought it mattered so much, and now I understand why I woke up 20 years before I started talking into a podcast, into a microphone about it. Well, first of all, because I probably would have been telling people to quit their psych meds or something crazy, but I had to grow and mature, but then also I had to expand my capacity to like hold ideas and hold paradox. And that has taken me a really long time. I eventually understood that, I believe that we're going through, I hate a lot of these words now because I don't resonate with a lot of the movements around them, but we're going through an ascension of consciousness. We're going through an expansion of consciousness. We're remembering what we were, is my understanding, but that we won't stay there because it's boring. We won't stay in the blue ball of light. We won't stay in the constant orgasm because it's eventually grating, and we enjoy descending into density. We enjoy experiencing our truth as duality rather than polarity, And so it really doesn't matter, which is, I find to be very fun. Other people find to be depressing, and I think that's a phase. I think you have to go through the.
Yeah, I agree. I find it fun as well.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I went through so many of the same experiences. I think that the whole "I need to save the world" phase is probably necessary to motivate you to the point where you at least try, and then you get disillusioned, obviously. But then it's like, well, okay, but you signed up for the job already, so you got to do what you can.
Yeah. I mean, now I think like what makes me, we're raised on certain myths, and we're raised on a lot of saviorism propaganda, and we're raised on a lot of good versus evil. That's for sure.
And all that stuff is just hardwired. That's a big issue. I mean, that all that stuff is hardwired into just Western reality, even if just normal people, quote unquote normal people. And that's why for me in my personal life, the Eastern traditions and Taoism and Buddhism and things that are just not about crisis and saviors and apocalypses, and are just about kind of like achieving a nice vibe forever, have been really, really healthy and helpful for me. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of just where we are getting, I think we have this is kind of something I've started to push back on myself and the stuff I take in is like, it's becoming a whole thing now where we're all talking about consciousness. Like so many people are going through these awakenings. They're happening faster and faster. Yeah. You know, it used to be a near-death experience, and then it was kind of like psychedelics would do it. Now I've come in contact with people who are just driving down the street and just clicked, right? So I think that we are going into a conscious awareness reality. I don't think it's going to last very long. But
well, if you look back, you know, it's like, I'm sure you remember the whole 2012 thing, and then everyone was like, oh yeah, right, after nothing happened, quote unquote.
Right.
But it's like, if you just zoom out a bit, if you just think about how much the world has changed in our lifetime, even in the last 2 years, but even in the last 20 years, even since the 90s, it's like, I think that reality now would be pretty unrecognizable even to somebody who grew up with just cable TV and not the internet, you know, like
yeah,
just how much the internet has warped people's minds in so many ways and expanded their minds. And I think that, you know, if you just step back a bit, like we are all, objectively speaking, going through this intense consciousness transformation process, whether we like it or not. And people who are blessed enough to be willing to surf and ride the wave and have, you know, and I think a lot of people who have had magical new age awakening, whatever you want to call it, experiences are kind of like, the great thing about that is you get a preview, and so nothing really surprises you after that, where everyone else is like, oh my God, Trump, Russian propaganda, everything's collapsing. I can't control it anymore. I can't, like, and it's just, you know, it's like if you've already been dwelling in the space where you realize everything's empty, or everything is duality, or everything is like in, you know, in this transformation, whatever, you know, whatever language you put on it, chaos, you know, cosmos in chaos. It's like, okay, you know, it's like, I guess that's concerning, but it's really not, you know.
Are you new here?
Yeah, it's like, have you ever?
Are you just finding out that reality's not real?
Even if you've just like had a handful of psychedelic experiences,
right,
you know, you're going to be better prepped for reality as it is, I think.
Yeah. No, I really feel sorry for people who've never done acid. Like when 2020 hit, I was like, oh man, I don't know. I'm so grateful for my just loose grip on reality, because I think for people who really thought reality was real.
If you think reality is real, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a hard time.
You know, we're in the halfway point. I think we're in a pretty hilarious landing, or whatever the opposite of a landing is, taking off.
You know that experience where you've been like tripping for way longer than is comfortable, and your mind is like, okay, but let me show you one more thing. Okay, but let me show you one more thing. Okay, no, but really this time for sure, let me show you one more thing. And you're just like, I just want to just stop. Like, I just want to at least focus my mind and meditate. It's like, no, this is the big revelation.
Yeah.
You got to check this one. This is the final one. Okay, but one more thing. This one for real. This is the final one. And like, I think that that is so funny. I think that, you know, the whole thing about, I guess psychedelic means mind manifesting. I think that's what the mind actually is. It's like showing you what your mind is doing anyways. Your mind is constantly like trying to get the next thing, and it's all total horseshit. And hopefully from the drug experience you realize it's like, that is the nature of illusion and Maya and all that. It's your mind doing that jackassery to you. Yeah. You know, but everyone else is like, oh yeah, no, this is totally real. Like, I gotta like focus on, you know, what Trump is doing right now, 24/7, you know, like whatever it is.
No, it really is, you know, because the phases of the awakening, you know, they go in different orders for different people, but you go through that one phase where you realize that you're Jesus.
Okay.
You know? And then you realize.
Sure. Yeah. I know if you're raised in a Western culture, it's probably going to happen at some point.
You go, oh my God, it's so cringy. I wonder if it happens less because there's so many people talking about it. But when I went through
maybe we are all Jesus though. Maybe Jesus is a collective being. We
are. I don't read books or anything because I can't. But did you ever read The Golden Lake?
No. What is that?
It's the lady who makes the galactic heritage decks. Anyway, I bought the book. My partner reads a lot of books, so I bought him this book. And one thing that he said was in the book, she describes that when you live a life, you go back to this lake, and that your drop of of water goes back into the lake, and then you come out a different drop. So that's why so many people believe that they are Cleopatra or whatever, is because they do have resonance of that drop, because you're like kind of a fresh new drop. And I like that description.
I like that too. I think there's definitely, I actually see it at this point both ways though. I used to feel the kind of, because Timothy Leary said this at one point, it's like, well, everyone's the reincarnation of everybody, and we're all collective consciousness, and so you can tap into being anyone at any point. And that really resonated with me and made sense for a long time. And I still think that's true to some extent. But I've also had tons of experiences where it's like, no, it actually is linear, one lifetime to the next lifetime. So
yeah,
I kind of see it. I kind of see it the traditional way now at this point, at least in addition to that.
Linear from one life to the next.
Yeah, like the way you first read about it in books, you know.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. People say time's not real, and I've had a little bit of experience with that, but can't really understand anything until I've experienced it. These concepts, I don't have the capacity to hold on to things in my mind. Really, I'm a walking expression of ADHD. So I have to experience things first. It was like 2017. Was the first time I ever experienced a timeline shift in real time. And I experienced it. I was on stage doing a show, and I just saw a walking sidewalk underneath me. And I saw it shift to a different, like, moving sidewalk. And then my entire life was different when I got off of that.
Interesting. Okay.
Off of that stage.
That's
yeah.
Interesting.
I wanted different things, and I was walking through the world differently. And then I started to tune into it.
Do you ever suspect, I mean, I've had this thought before, it's like, because I've had somewhat similar experiences, or rather someone I know has had somewhat similar experiences on drugs. And I kind of wonder if that stuff is happening to us all the time. It's just that we're not paying attention to it. And if you're in like an altered state of consciousness, like you can see it. Or if you're not even in an altered state of consciousness, if you're the type of person that is paying attention to that stuff, you see it. But I kind of think this stuff is kind of happening all the time.
It is happening all the time. So I've been haven't done psychedelics in almost 2 years, but I was completely sober from 2005 to 2000. I think I did mushrooms once in 2012, and then I didn't do anything again until 2017. And even then, it's like a few times a year I might do psychedelics, or I take a long time off. But I don't drink, I don't smoke weed. And I am very tuned into energy, and I get more and more tuned into energy. And I would say that when people are like, nothing happened in 2012, it's like, well, you think that the material reality is reality, and it's not. It's such a small portion of what's actually happening. If you're tuned into energy, you know that massive things happened.
Well, even the material world, I mean, look what... It's like people thought something was going to happen on the day of 2012. Yeah. It's like, well, look at the world a year later. Exactly. It's kind of like everyone was like, oh, the world's going to end in 2000. It's like, well, you know, September 11th kind of like changed everything, right? So it's just There's a little bit of a delayed effect there.
And I mean, I think you can look back. I've watched a couple of movies recently that show 1968 and the way that their world was changing like crazy, and everybody was getting assassinated, and that must have felt like the end of the world. That must have been wild. The 60s must have been wild. But when you look at consciousness and what has happened to consciousness, like ultimately that's what's changing, is the parameters of the game, my understanding, which means nothing. But the parameters of the game are changing, the way that we move through the world, the way that we understand ourselves.
Look at the world sense, the one that always blows my mind, because now that I am an aging white man, it is the law that I have to start obsessing over World War II. So it's just a thing. It's like getting into grilling or something like that. I don't know. But you just look at how the world has changed since World War II, and it's like, if you think about what people's day-to-day reality was like in World War II or the Great Depression, it's like incomprehensible. I mean, people's day-to-day existence in World War II was just mass killing all over the world. And it's like, I don't think any of us can even conceptualize, let alone handle that. But now you think about like what reality is now with like social media and like, you know, ridiculous influencers and all of this. It's like practically a different planet.
It is very much a different game. And I think to some extent it's constantly changing, right? It's always turning into something else. But I think that, when I think about stuff, how traumatic those wars were, World War II and Vietnam and stuff. We shit on the boomers. We shit on, I'm 45, so I was shitting on the greatest generation. The boomers, I'm a little closer to
I'm
them.
40, so yeah. Well, even the boomers did not, unless they got drafted. I mean, they had the experience of dealing with social turmoil and riots and trying to deal with Vietnam, but unless they got drafted, which was horrible, that's still not the same as World War II. I mean, it's like, I just finished this book, Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder, who's an expert on Eastern European history, and it's really interesting to read in the context of Ukraine, because it's just about the level of death that happened in Eastern Europe in the 30s and 40s, and it's just like it's like I literally cannot compute it. It's unimaginable, and that was like civilian, like literally everyone was involved in that. From the Soviet and the German side, it's like civilians, like everyone, and the scary thing also is like all that was in some part a war over the Ukraine, because that's where the food was grown. So we're kind of right back there, and this is a scary time because, it's like I feel that the boomer generation and Gen X and millennials and whatever the ones after millennials are called have lived in this bubble of utopia, where it's like, yeah, consciousness exploration, drugs, internet, jobs that really aren't that bad if you really think about it for half a second. And there's enough food to eat. There's refrigerators, and I feel like we could just go back to the way it was before so quickly.
Yeah, that is interesting. Trauma is interesting because you can line it up against the trauma of that, where you're just in raw survival mode.
Yeah.
Right? I used to think that when I'd watch The Walking Dead, I go, oh, these guys have no time to think about the fact that their friend just died brutally right in front of them, right? You don't have, like, I don't know anything about your historical facts, but I have watched The Walking Dead. I'll use that as a point of reference.
Sure, yeah. That's kind of in a sense, it's like, that's the gift of trauma also, or when you're in traumatic situations, you can't think about anything except life or death decisions.
Yeah.
So you don't have to process what you're going through, and you're just like, okay, do this. Then later you have to deal with it.
Right.
But,
Do you believe we pass that stuff down? Do you believe that do you believe in like ancestral trauma?
I think so. Yeah. Do you know about epigenetics?
Yes. My brain always
When I say no,
confuses.
I don't mean like I'm a scientist or anything, but just like I read a Wikipedia about it once. Yeah. That's what I mean by do you
That's
know
my
about
level
it?
of
Okay, yeah,
expertise
it's the same.
everything.
Okay. So
I read a Medium article.
Exactly. It's like I read on the internet at one point that they, quote unquote, people who know, have proven that it's like, yeah, like your experiences actually are passed down in genetics, because we're constantly changing our genetic code based on our thoughts and our experiences. And that alone is like, that for me is like the refutation of like any negative argument about any spiritual anything. It's like, well, your literal thoughts are changing your genetic code and are going to be passed down.
Right.
So don't you think you might want to train your mind? So
you might want to train your mind, and like maybe we might want to give the millennials a little bit of a break, because I feel like that was the first generation that was like, okay, well, at some point there is a massive amount of trauma just being passed down generation to generation to generation. Someone has to start feeling their feelings. Yeah,
I thought about that a lot. It's like that really is, and I think that's a really beautiful point. I mean, that is probably how the millennials should be viewed. It's like somebody at some point has got to be like, okay, enough is enough. Because the other thing is, like, I love how like boomers call millennials snowflakes, and then you go back and you look at these videos from 1968. It's like, y'all were literally sticking flowers in guns and dressing ridiculously. It's like, come on. It's like, okay, millennials are not that much of snowflakes. They work hard and worry about their student debt and all of that. So
yeah, I think that boomers were dissociated, and I'm overgeneralizing here because I don't know the actual dates of stuff, but I think that they were about peace and love, and meanwhile many of them went to war, many of them lost their friends to going to war. They had trauma after trauma after trauma. They were very invested in those public figures that were getting assassinated. And
yeah, which does not compute to me at all. I don't understand. I feel like any generation after the boomers, it's like the kind of idol worship of people like Kennedy or Martin Luther King, like I guess Martin Luther King, but it's like the level of like fixation that people from that generation have on certain historical figures. It's like it just doesn't.
Saviorism,
Yeah, it just doesn't compute to me. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think because we are moving into I believe we are moving into a reality that's not hierarchical. We'll see the collapse of celebrity culture. Every time you pedestalize a guru or a leader or a teacher or a celebrity or whatever, they will let you down. And that is because we are learning that we are part of one organism. But when you have these, when you look back to what the consciousness was at that point, there was still a desire for a new world, but still the category of reason that we need a leader to take us there. It's not us that holds the power. It's,
Right.
it's this person up here.
That just weirds me out. I mean, it just does. It creeps me out. It's like, because we know now from history, all those people were all fucked up too.
Yeah.
And it's just
Right.
like, it's like this yearning for Jesus or Hitler type thing where it's like,
Yeah.
why don't you just focus on what, your immediate surroundings? It's also why I really love the podcasting as a medium, because it's about the message of, every medium is its own message. Podcasting is about conversation between people, right?
Yeah.
And it's on an equal level.
Yeah.
And that's really, really beautiful as a medium. And I think that's one of the reasons why people like them so much.
Yeah, I think that I feel the same way about podcasting. And this is something I love about the internet and social media is it's kind of become a free for all where the gatekeepers don't get to decide. We used to have a mainstream because a few people got to decide what everyone saw and what everyone took in and what influenced culture. And, you always had the outliers, which one? Anyway, that's one of those words I only see in print and then I don't know how to pronounce it.
I'm like that too.
So things are shifting because we're taking in a lot more perspectives, and we got to learn about each other, and we got to learn about people that we'd only had propaganda presented to us about before, who aren't in our immediate environment. And, it's kind of, the pendulum has kind of swung the other way where we're, using it to scream at each other. Mm-hmm. But I think this is all just a very natural evolution. And I've become annoyingly, because I usually make fun of kind of love and light stuff. Because I feel like when a lot of like, I'm just love and light, I can feel the rage boiling under your throat chakra.
It's like, well, it's like you just don't want to acknowledge the other side of yourself. It's like we used to call them white lighters. It's just like and by the way, those are have you noticed those are like the most judgmental people?
Yeah, they really are. They are. And it's yet again the same category of reason. We bring that same puritanical bullshit from religion into spirituality, and spirituality is just about existing in it just exists. You just are. You have a spirit. You're spiritual. That's it. It doesn't need to be a performance, but you kind of have to go through these dark nights of the soul to realize that it doesn't need to be a performance. But then the trick, I guess, the joke that I'm finding at the end is that through accepting my shadow and, just being like, okay, I'm a shitbag. It just is what it is. I'm not a great person, and I'm capable of everything I've ever talked shit about. Because every time I've ever been like, I would never do that, I end up doing it.
Well, that's really important. I mean, that's always so uncomfortable, but
yeah,
it's like, well, but if you don't realize that, then you are dissociated and you do fall prey to thinking that you're different or better than other people, or that, it's always the people who are completely incapable of acknowledging their own dark side that are really dangerous.
I believe that. And I after spending years on drugs for a long time, I didn't trust people who were never drug addicts, because there's something very real about someone who's seen their darkness, seen their capacity,
I agree.
Robbed their grandmother.
I'm not recommending everyone become a drug addict, but
no.
There is a certain, it's like when you interact with, sex workers are similar as well. I mean, there are certain people when you interact with society on certain wavelengths, or you have the experience of being outside of society also, you see things a lot more clearly, I think.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, I have become capable of compassion through making an enormous amount of mistakes, where now it has had a terrible impact on my ability to be funny, because I've run out of things to make fun of, because the pleasure is gone. Because I used to go, well, that person's stupid. And then it's like, well, actually, they are a product of their trauma and conditioning, and they didn't get a chance to whatever. And when you look at the boomers shitting on the millennials for being snowflakes, it's because they can't feel their feelings, and they're seeing their reflection in the millennials, and they long for that. They long to be able to feel
well,
their
the boomers
feelings.
all became stockbrokers in the 80s, so, and they all feel guilty about selling out, I think.
They feel guilty about selling out, and they're really, and this is shifting. I know a lot of boomers going through spiritual awakenings, but they're so much of what we project onto each other and inflict on each other is just like propaganda for capitalism, or whatever this is. Whatever this matrix that we've been in, where all of our virtues and our morals are, and I talk about this constantly, it's so loud to me that our virtues and our morals are just handed to us in childhood. They're indoctrinated into us. And I'm not talking about like, don't have sex before marriage, don't do drugs. I'm talking about be productive.
Yeah.
Push yourself.
Yeah.
Make yourself do things you don't want to do.
Right.
You know? And
yeah, you're only as valuable as your labor value,
right.
basically.
Right. And then they talk, we talk shit about another generation because they don't want to do that, rather than going, hey,
right.
we tried to carry that. We tried to collapse this machine and failed. Go for it. We didn't have the heart space open, so we couldn't do it. And
well, but then again, I mean, if you think about the boomers compared to their parents were all psychopathic mass killers with no, literally with no access to therapy, and we're all alcoholics with PTSD.
Right.
And in a lot of countries probably were walking around with like body trauma and like shrapnel in their bodies. So there was an improvement was made. That's like a big deal. Like I don't shit on boomers.
We are evolving. I mean, we are evolving. I am so grateful to be Gen X, because I'm just dissociated enough to not get too beat up in the reality that we're currently in, but also capable of making that shift.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm technically, what am I? I'm a
exennial.
I'm a exennial. Yeah, which is a good spot to be, because I actually remember the world before digital.
Yeah.
But I'm close enough to the millennials to be able to make fun of them as practically one of them. So and I understand their experience, but I'm like the weird in-betweener. But I think Gen X definitely, the Gen X cynicism and edgelordery and just general distrust of everything is like sorely missed. I think like millennials are so like painfully fucking earnest.
Yeah.
It's just like, just you don't need to try this hard. It's just like, come on. And then, I actually like Gen Z a lot. Like I feel like there's like I feel
like they're a mix of the two.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of space for like the Gen X Gen Z team up against the millennials, because there's a similar kind of like just like like I don't know, like nihilistic cynicism there.
Yeah.
So,
but also just very like my understanding of like higher dimensional reality of what's happening is that we're getting more dimensions to ourselves, to each individual, and that you'll have more. I got to find something other than categories of reason to say, but you have more ways of looking at the world. And so, it was just egoic before 2012. These are my notes that mean nothing. And after 2012, there was a mental network. And one thing that shifted after 2012 that we've now had for so long that people probably wouldn't even realize, is that after that shift in 2012, we began to be able to tell when people were lying through like, feels like subtext when somebody isn't telling the truth. We began to be more tuned in. We also became more aware of our thoughts, which collectively
do you mean just by having a record on the internet or something else?
No, just like, how when someone's like telling you, I'm going to go do this thing, I don't know, like they're getting ready to leave their partner or something, and they're making up bullshit about why they have to do it. And there was like a kind of taking people at face value thing that you just kind of had to go by what people said unless you were a highly suspicious person. But now you can feel the subtext of what's actually going on.
Okay.
The way that if you're watching a movie and this is what they're presenting, but you can see the underlying energy.
Yeah.
Different than discernment, which showed up later and is still kind of becoming the norm. But there were just shifts that happened in consciousness. Examples. Rape culture was something we really started talking about, which is something I didn't agree with. I was like, oh, every guy who ever had sex with me while I was passed out is a rapist. And they were like, yeah, kind of. And then I was like, oh, okay. We started to see things. We started to be able to go, oh, that's kind of fucking insane. We started to see past the way we had always done things. And then I think what happened between 2017 and 2019 was the beginning of the big one, which is the heart space opening. And I personally could not feel my feelings. I literally couldn't feel them. I didn't feel them. I thought that made me advanced because I didn't like the way it felt when other people were feeling their feelings. It felt very messy to me.
Yeah.
So I was definitely had some spiritual bypass stuff around that because I simply couldn't feel them. And then I had this heart space opening. And now when I haven't experienced it, I perceive it through the mental space, but I process it through the emotional space.
Okay.
And I feel like millennials were born with that. I feel like that generation was born with that, but no support for what to do with it. So they just ended up balls out traumatized because they have this open heart space in a world where nobody else knows how to do this. So speaking vulnerably to someone, being open and honest about your intentions or realizing your role in things or, just animals, nature, stuff like this. I was so cut off from all of this, so dissociated from my body and my heart that it's just a whole aspect of awareness that I didn't have access to. And I feel like the millennial generation brought that in.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's a exennial, zennial thing as well, because I feel like I can pretty easily go back and forth between those. And
always could?
No, because I definitely was always cynical and disassociated, and I had to cultivate the heart opening through spiritual practice and psychedelics and long, suffering and all of that. Yeah. But to be fair, walking around in an open heart space is sometimes it is traumatizing and it's too much. If you don't know, you need to be able to know how to turn it on and turn it off, I think. Yeah. And that is, but in the same way, everyone who was doing ecstasy in the early 90s and late 80s and things like that, I'm sure went through similar stuff, because MDMA puts you in that space where you just love everyone and everything. And then you realize maybe that's not such a good idea. So I can kind of go back and forth between the emotional heart space and Bret Easton Ellis mentality, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's a good thing because you need different tools for different situations.
Yeah, I feel like it's the art of the toggle, right? It's like now we have, because now I also have body awareness, which I didn't have until I got Lyme disease, where now through that journey of getting my body back in balance and after being sick for over a year, I learned that my body has truth. And that for me personally, my body should be making the call. And so it's this finding all these different aspects of ourselves so we're not just living life through the ego. I don't believe in killing the ego or trying to cut it off. But rather seeing all these things as awareness centers and learning the art, and I'll let you know when I figure this out, but learning the art of the toggle. So a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm bringing my head to the heart party. Oh, this is I'm working through conflict with my partner. This is time for the heart space. Yeah. This is time for vulnerability. I'm trying to get my taxes done. Let's not be in the heart space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and for me, this really is the value of real spiritual practice as well, where I kind of look at things from an engineering perspective as well, where it's just the more tools you have in your toolkit, whether those are psychological or spiritual or meditative or whatever it happens to be, energetic work, yoga, even exercise, right? Those tools all allow you to have options. And when you have options, you can approach each situation and say, okay, what am I going to choose for this? Because, it's like when you're in a relationship with somebody, you want to be as non-reactive as possible, right? And just have space for them to express their feelings without reacting and without engaging in conflict. But there's lots of places where you don't want to do that. You need to have a thick skin and you need to be a little bit fight or flight. It's like I was just talking to my friend a couple days ago. It's like the thing about PTSD and trauma is people with PTSD are much more likely to survive traumatic, or it's like PTSD is an adaptive reaction.
Right.
Your fight or flight is keyed up for a reason. It's to keep you alive. The tricky part is the art of the toggle, as you're saying, like turning it on and off. So, for me, it's all about having tools and options for how to approach different situations, and then just being able to cultivate self-awareness, particularly through meditation, so you can kind of at least like have like a second or two where you step back and meta think about where you are, so that you can make a clear decision about, instead of just reacting. And for me, it's like at this point, it's funny because like 20 years ago, point of spiritual practice, awakening all the universe, point of spiritual practice for me now. Like all I want, oh Lord, all I want is one more second of reaction time, in between stimulus and response,
Seriously. I just want to stay in my body at Target. That's really where I want to get through a Target shopping trip without dissociating. Have you been getting into, I can't believe the stuff I get into now. Nervous system work at all?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I taught a course on on magick.me, my school called Alchemy of Chaos, where I really thought about this, and I kind of came to the conclusion that when you really reductively boil down spirituality, like ultimately what these techniques, when you take out all the religious language and all this, what we're looking at with these techniques like meditation, yoga, ritual, prayer, all of that these are all techniques to get to switch between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So to get out of fight or flight. Because if you really think about people who are monks who meditated for 20 years, it's like, well, what are they, in real terms? I'm not saying all the other visions and religious stuff is not real. I'm just saying, like, if you really were to be as reductive as possible, which I think is at least a useful exercise, what are they really in real world terms able to do? And the obvious answer is they're able to stay out of their fight or flight response at will.
Right.
Which is like, if you really think about that for a second, it's like, it's not just that that's valuable, that's everything.
It's truly everything. Right now, I think that I like that thing you said about PTSD being, I believe we're living through the apocalypse. I don't think not Armageddon necessarily, but that we are, the unveiling, has the potential to be pretty wild. Yeah, we have
since the 1600s, I think. I mean, the apocalypse is a long drawn out process.
Yeah. How long do you think we do this?
About 700 more years.
Wow, really?
And I won't mention my sources, but yeah.
Interesting.
Hindu gurus.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something pretty pivotal coming in the next 10 years? Or you think
I think we just went through something unbelievably pivotal. I think we'll be processing even just COVID and for the rest of the decade.
Yeah.
I think that's probably enough to chew on for now, knock on wood, hopefully. But if Putin drops a nuke, like, that's going to be pretty pivotal.
That'll be some work.
Yeah, we'll have to stop and think about that for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't necessarily think so much through the lens of the physical reality as much as I used to. And by used to, I mean like 7 months ago. I feel pretty zoomed in and focused on what's happening to consciousness, because I think what's happening to consciousness is like, the physical reality is a reflection of what's happening inside of us, right? So if the masses are, feeling a certain way, that's what will then happen in reality. Yeah. And I think just because of the kind of the content that I do and then the work I do sessions sometimes where I'm like helping people through awakening stuff, and I'm seeing a mass awakening just in the small group of people that I am coming in contact with. I'm seeing a huge shift in perspective. Just people who are like stone cold atheists, then waking up one day and being like, "Oh shit!" Just awareness.
Why do you think that is?
I think that we're waking up. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm in a coma and that this is a dream and you're part of my dream, and that the reason that my whole life is about awakening is because I'm trying to come out of a coma. And sometimes I think that we are AI, and the reason that we're also paranoid about AI is because our makers are trying to get us to go back the other way. So,
Could be.
and then recently I have been playing with the idea that the entire world is run by microbes. And
yeah, that could be very real for sure.
That NPC thing that people talk about, I don't want to reduce humans to not being characters, so I shy away from that now. But like, something that was striking when I had Lyme disease was it just took over my brain. It took over my brain in a way that I believed I was the parasite.
Whoa.
And by parasite, because Lyme is like a spirochete or something.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
different. So, you know how there are certain, toxoplasmosis does this, maybe there are certain parasites that will make an insect or an animal basically commit suicide
Like
so it can get to a new host.
Yeah,
right?
cordyceps. Yeah.
Right. So,
that's my response to anyone that thinks nature is beautiful and all flowers. It's like, look up cordyceps. Yeah.
So you have, everyone's got microbes, right? So you're just a planet. This is what I learned when I was getting rid of Lyme, which is not easy, is that I'm a planet for microbes. And what happens, for people who get like past acute Lyme disease is that, it's just a tipping point. I hit the tipping point of the good things and bad things. The things that want to be in a symbiotic relationship with me, like the probiotics in my digestion, and the things that are just like, we're going to dumb you down. We're going to turn you into a host so that we can have our reality. And when you look at everything in our reality, it's so parasitic. There's so many parasitic. We are parasitic in our codependent relationships. Capitalism is parasitic. We're kind of waking up to how parasitic everything is. And when you look at it, and this is just a thought experiment, I like to look at all the different ways that reality could be, and I think they're all valid, but who benefits from the food being kind of fucked up? Parasites. Who benefits from the medicine being not wildly effective? Parasites. Who benefits from abortion being illegal? They need hosts.
Interesting.
Who benefits from everybody being kind of dumb? Because there is definitely that. There's an agenda to make everyone dumb. So I'm playing with this idea that there is a microbial hive mind.
Okay.
And what we call asleep or not aware or unawakened, whatever the fuck, that zombie thing is that people are just being used as hosts. And so the microbes are getting to experience reality through the eyes of the zombie that they've taken over. Most people, when they go through an awakening, do a parasite cleanse.
Okay.
They go down that rabbit hole.
I know people who have gone down that rabbit hole. That's such an unhealthy, like, it's just, I think there is a condition called delusional parasitosis. And,
oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Where people just think that it sounds kind of tweaky, where they get kind of tweaky and they think there's parasites all over. But that, you probably know this, there are more bacteria and non-human microbes in a human body than human cells.
Yeah.
So what's up with that? And we also know that, they're now discovering all this stuff about like consciousness has a lot to do with intestinal microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
It's like probiotics in your digestion system, and that's all the stuff that we've been killing with antibiotics and eating pasteurized, sanitized food and all of this stuff. So people are kind of figuring that out. I've thought a lot about this, actually. I think, well, another thing that I've thought about is particularly with magic, it's like when you do rituals and you're talking to spirits and gods and things like that, or maybe even a better example is like the DMT experience. What you're experiencing on DMT, maybe it's higher dimensions, or maybe you're seeing the inside of your cells.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just going further within. And obviously you can make the hermetic argument. It's like, what's the difference between further in and further out? They're really the same, which I believe. But for me, it's like, that's really interesting. So here's the other thing that I've thought about. The converse argument to that is, okay, well, what in that, when you're defining things as parasitic or non-human, well, what is the human component of that? And the answer would be what is produced by DNA. But DNA is all DNA on planet Earth is the same. It's the same DNA. It's just like it's like a deck of tarot cards that get shuffled differently for each organism. It's just they move around the sequence, but it's the same DNA. One DNA produces all the life on Earth. So I've also thought about Francis Crick, even, who was one of the people who discovered DNA on acid, by the way, wrote a book in the early 80s where he gave the hypothesis that there was probably some DNA on an asteroid or some bit of space rock that landed on Earth, and just it took that one bit of DNA getting into contact with water, something like that, and it just produced all of this, like the black goo in Prometheus, and that's pretty satisfying to me.
Yeah.
But then I don't know enough to say, but like, it's like, well, does that also include microorganisms like bacteria? I mean, is it theoretically all the same thing? That's not even getting into like mitochondrial RNA, which is basically a parasite that lives within DNA that is passed down from the mother's side that we don't even really understand what it does.
Yeah.
And yeah, without getting into upsetting arguments about RNA modification, which I will...
You want this on YouTube, don't you?
I'll leave it at that. These are interesting to think about. What is consciousness really?
Yeah. I could do it all day. And to bring it back to the conversation that we had earlier, because I go on so many tangents that I never finish a thought.
Me too.
I'm not sure that the reason that I experience them as aliens is because that's just what my consciousness was aligned with. That was a myth or a metaphor that I would resonate with. I mean, I was not into aliens before that, but I think that there was a part of me that felt alien my entire life that didn't feel like from here. So this consciousness, which I'm not sure isn't just me from the future or an aspect of myself, showed up and was like, we're not from here. And it made me feel like, okay, I'm not from here. Where other people communicate with fairies, and maybe it's because they feel more grounded to earth and they feel this, but maybe it's all the same shit. Maybe none of it's real. Maybe all of it is story. And I'm really okay with that. I'm also okay with this just being schizophrenia, because I think that if you are born, I've said this a million times, like if you're born a Mormon and you die a Mormon, Mormonism is real for you. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if the rest of us are like Joseph Smith was a Scott.
Yeah, and at this point it's like, you know what? Maybe they have a few things figured out. Look at the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean... Probably not, but like
probably not. I'm just saying, like,
as my reality.
There's a website called Mormon Leaks that is extremely disturbing. I just mean just as a rhetorical point about like who's really got it figured out. Yeah, no, I did a podcast with a Mormon for a while, so I'm pretty hip too. Yeah, it's pretty wacky.
It's pretty standard made up stuff, but for the people who are in it, it's real for them, and I don't know. It's that stupid cliche thing where it's like the more you learn, the more you realize like you don't know. And what a comfort it is to be like, yeah, I mean, if you go back, I mean, there's now like 5 years of me talking into microphones. You hear me rehash a lot of the stuff I said here today, but then you also hear me hold like really harsh, like not harsh, but like rigid ideas that I've released over time. My Patreon is this like years long journey further and further into paradox, honestly.
That's
to
great.
The point that it's hard to talk into microphones sometimes because I want to contradict myself, which I think is the fun of it. And if
That's
I am
great.
nuts...
You shall know truth by its paradox. It's the only way to express truth.
Right. I think it's subjective. I don't think there's anything's real, nothing's a fact. Everything's subjective. If you... And that utopia would be everyone expressing their honest perspective while being able to hold the paradox of a perspective they don't
that's
resonate
perfect.
with.
I sometimes think about that. It's like the 2012 stuff or the Buddha. It's like, well, the Buddhists have been saying forever. It's like the point of consciousness is to understand the interconnection of all beings and the fact that we are all mutually interconnected and independent, and that this is a team sport, not about the divergent individual, but not in some fascistic collective way, but just in the sense that like understanding everything is connected. Consciousness is all connected. You know, it's like, I don't know if you ever had an experience of like taking an organic substance, maybe mushrooms, and it's like you feel like you're talking to like trees or fungus.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're ingested that, and now it's representing itself to you in this. Methamphetamine is really interesting because it's a synthetic chemical. It's a God damn it. It's a synthetic chemical, and it's like this totally synthetic, non-human state of consciousness. Or it can be. Ketamine can sometimes be similar. Not similar, but some of these classes of drugs feel, maybe that's not your experience, I don't know, feel like very machine-like and synthetic.
That's really interesting. It's hard for me because I had a very positive experience with I lost my teeth, but like I had a very positive experience with it. However, I would never recommend that anyone else do it because I knew 100 people and none of them would tell you, maybe one would say, I'm glad I did that. They lost their lives. They went to prison. I think for me, I grew up my mother was a meth addict. I had a lot of trauma there. And I think in order for me to ever traverse what felt like a mother that hated my guts and was very mean to me.
You had to understand.
I had to go I had to retrace those steps.
That makes sense.
And then I think I had to be outside of society. And I think I had to be in an environment that was very free to do that. And I'm fortunate that I did it pre-fentanyl, so my life wasn't in danger like it is now. So I am absolutely not an advocate of it, but for me, and this just occurred to me recently.
Yeah, fentanyl's like in everything. Fentanyl's like even in acid now, right? It's literally in everything. Like, I would not touch drugs at all anymore. I'm also glad that I went through that phase long ago. Yeah, definitely tested the least. I wouldn't trust anything at this point. It's just really tragic.
No, it's really fucked up. The amount of friends I've lost to that shit.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So I think I was on psychedelics basically it's basically what it is. I mean, that's what it feels like. It's a very psychedelic
I've heard about people putting fentanyl on mushrooms. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah.
The conspiracy theorist in me is like, what is that about? Because it doesn't make sense. If you're putting in opiates, that
it's just really
can kind of make sense. I don't typically...
Oh, yeah.
It's not great to kill your customer base. That's not typically
Well, to be fair, I mean, like, drug dealers are sometimes not the brightest people in the world, but
not the sharpest tool in the shed. Yeah. So, I'm not. I don't know. There's a part of me that just doesn't. It feels like it's maybe part of a different thing.
Well, if you look at OxyContin, it's like they just sued the Sackler family. Successfully, although of course since they're rich they got out of it. I mean, like, they've proven there was basically the Purdue pharmaceutical that made OxyContin knew they were going to kill everyone in the heartland of America with heroin.
Did you watch Dope Sick?
No.
Yeah, it's about that. I could only watch like half of an episode at a time. I would be so angry. It's dark, but it's worth watching.
It's about that, or
it's the story of that drug. That's like when I was using and when I got clean. And when I got clean, I moved across the country and was in recovery with only opioid addicts. They didn't have meth addicts where I moved. And so we didn't fuck with each other too much on the streets. There was kind of like parallel communities, but tweakers kind of stuck with tweakers.
It's
and
tribal.
junkies kind of stuck with junkies.
Yeah.
And then we got, we're going two different speeds, but occasionally you needed to get together to do something. But then I got clean and that was all my friends. And I've lost so many more friends in recovery. And it was at the height, not the height. Is it
because they relapse, but then there's fentanyl? That's really tragic. I've lost several friends to drugs, unfortunately.
Overdoses too, because fentanyl's relatively recent. I mean, I got clean
me
20 years ago now, but
I actually, luckily, knock on wood, I don't think I've lost anyone to fentanyl, but overdoses. But I could be wrong. Did you read William Burroughs at all? Like,
no, I
Naked
don't
Lunch
read.
or anything like
I'm
that?
like dyslexic and I have ADHD, so I like scan the index sometimes and look for words that I might really want to read about, and then I read like a paragraph, and then I forget that I read it, and I think I made up the idea.
Okay.
A little bit later, I'm a plagiarist, an accidental.
I only bring it up because he obviously was a heroin addict and a magical thinker, and he wrote so much about heroin, and he talked about the clear view that addicts can have of society. And he talked a lot about, it's like all these people are like judging addicts, but it's like our whole society is a pyramid of drug dealing.
Yeah.
It's like these pharmaceuticals are drug dealers, the whole thing. And I've thought about this more a lot. And, I get little dark downloads sometimes, all the time. I realized recently, this is all alleged, but I realized it's like, I was really thinking, it's like when we withdrew from Afghanistan, it's like, why were we really in Afghanistan? Why were we really in Vietnam? Was it really about oil? Was it really about politics? Because like the whole thing about when we went to Iraq was like no blood for oil. And I'm like, oddly enough, Afghanistan and Vietnam are the two biggest heroin production, opium growing centers on the planet.
Poppy, right?
Yeah, that's where all the opium in the world is grown. Why is Afghanistan? Why have both of those places been a object of imperial contention for forever? Where did all that opium that made all that OxyContin come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't trust the billionaires, and I don't trust anyone in authority. I don't. So I just assume.
So you're saying it's like, well, you don't want to kill your customer. It's like, well, unless you do. It's like, unless there's something else going on.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I think if you can make a bunch of money while they die,
and then get the land afterwards.
Yeah.
Which is the real wealth. I was watching a thing on, even not like my whole thing that I recommend to people is like, don't read conspiracy theories, read history, because it's way darker. It's like it's way more fucked up, and it's all real. It's like literally, it's like I'm not an anti-conspiracy theory person. I'm just like, just graduate to the actual facts, because I promise you they're way worse. They're way worse. Like, it's just like the history of humanity is the history of people like fucking each other over in new and creative ways. So but going back to like, because I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, also the whole thing about like, we have this category of cartels and narco states now. It's like, oh, well, Colombia's a narco state, Mexico's parts of Mexico are narco states. It's like, well, why are we different? Like, are we different? Like, I don't know. And like, I was even looking back, like, I just came to the conclusion, it's like, America's a drug cartel, Yeah, we're
not great. And it's kind of cringy to me how, I feel like a lot of propaganda about like how it's different.
It's not. It's not. Humans are humans.
And I'm not. I don't know a lot about stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me if I don't know. I feel like we live in a propaganda.
Absolutely. Well, propaganda is another form.
It in yourself.
Propaganda is another form of junk. It's like it's another form of narcotic to give people. I think that we live in a narcotized culture, and obviously the wonderful thing about narcotics is people administer them to themselves, and people are narcotized with drugs, they're narcotized with the news, they're narcotized with propaganda, they're narcotized with pharmaceuticals, they're narcotized with porn and video games and like all this stuff that they consume all day long. And I was looking back when I started thinking about this, because I really started thinking about this after Trump was elected and thinking about OxyContin. But like the 19th century, right? It's like the Opium War. The British literally rolled up on the coast of China and just unloaded opium into the whole country to get everyone junked out so that they could take over the country. That's historical fact. It's like, wow, you think that just stopped in the 19th century?
Interesting. It's kind of like how do spiders do this, and scorpions, like how certain species like numb you out.
That's interesting.
Before they take you out. That's interesting.
That's like my favorite is the tarantula wasp, which we have here.
Oh God.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, it's the worst. People can Wikipedia it on their own.
Back to 2016 Facebook.
Oh God.
It's the worst.
Is
that the worst bug?
I hope so. I hope there's nothing worse than that. But we have them here. I've seen them.
That's a fucking creepy synchronicity.
Yeah, I've seen them on my porch.
They have them here?
Yeah, tarantula wasps. And I'm just like, yeah, stay away. No, thank you. Because we have tarantulas here.
Yikes.
Yeah, I think those were the basis for the movie Alien, if I'm not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which makes sense.
Woof.
People can look that up on their own.
I don't want to go down there.
Yeah, well,
yeah. I think Dark Downloads is a great.
That'll be the name of my autobiography, Dark Downloads. Yeah. I had a dark download about the boomers recently also, and I maybe maybe we should come to a close before this gets too dark. Yeah, like, and I'm not like anti-boomer, obviously. It's like what I said before about the boomers, like kind of like putting an end, it's like, it's, if you look at the boomers and the millennials in sequence, how do I really feel? I don't think that in terms of consciousness, as far forward as we're going and making advances, it's just like people. We also have to come to grips with what has gone on before. We can't clean break with it. We've got to process. And that's all that the concept of karma and processing karma is about. And that's something that I'm pretty focused on. It's like, and you can see the millennials are focused on. It's like in sequence, the boomers and the millennials were very much, if you consider what happened in the 30s and 40s, it's just like, and compared to where we are now, we've made so much unbelievable good progress. It's like, you really cannot knock anyone. Right. On the other hand, I have the dark, I have like my light side and dark side versions of history. So here was my dark download about the boomers. The boomers' parents, but this is specifically about the US. The parents of the boomers in the US literally waded through the killing fields of Europe, murdering people, and then dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And America essentially took over the entire planet and held it hostage by putting a gun to its head in the form of a nuclear weapon, and was like, literally, if any of you get out of line, we are going to annihilate you with nuclear weapons and everything that you're just erase your entire culture from the map. And it's so much the fact that we're so crazy, we're willing to destroy the entire planet and all life if we have to go there. And just like, think of the collective trauma from that. Now we get to experience it again because now it's back on the table. But just like America was just like, we will literally kill you all and take you down with us if you just wink at us. And what did the children, like the baby boomers, as a result, were the richest generation in world history. That's why they could go run around and do all their shit. They had the safety net of being the richest generation in world history. And that safety net was built for them by mass murder and annihilation of whole civilizations. And what did they do to celebrate this? They spent several years dressing up like the people the Americans genocided in the first place to get here.
Yikes.
Party.
Wow. Yeah.
Were they really protesting, or were they partying, being on top of the social heap? And it's just kind of like, if you really think about how dark that is, it's like your parents murdering everyone and winning, and then you dressing like the people that a few generations back genocided. It's kind of like walking around with heads on poles.
Yeah, I mean, that's just America in a nutshell, right? I mean, that's how
that's
we
my
didn't
dark
start that in the 30s and 40s. I mean, that's like what it's based on. And I do believe that we're in a reckoning of that right now. You know, we're in the Pluto return. And I think that that's why we're being forced to face a lot of this that like I didn't pay attention in school. And so I don't have I love getting around people that have all these facts.
I'm full of random bullshit, really random dark bullshit.
Yeah, but there's a lot of spin, man. A lot of like a PR campaign. I feel like we've been raised in a PR campaign. And yeah, it's really interesting when our government like projects it onto other places. I think we're realizing that this is our.
Well, to be fair, I mean, like other places have been worse than us, but we're pretty bad.
Yeah, and it's. I feel like everything is pointing to everyone is doing the best they can with what they've got. Which
I love that.
Is hard to believe when we're talking about this sort of stuff, but I think that my belief is that we go in and out of phases of consciousness, like. Oh, my partner has a good name for this, but I can't. Ascension and descension. And when we descend, and we see the worst of what humankind is capable of. Yeah. And I do believe that we're coming out of it. I don't know how long we'll stay out of it, but that part of coming out of it is looking at it and making amends and choosing not to do that anymore. And that's what a lot of this chaos right now. I think the reason that we're facing so many things that we feel like we faced before is we are being given an opportunity to clear that karma, to clear that trauma, face it, own it, and do something differently.
Yeah.
And this just I mean, to me, this feels like a few really kind of chaotic years, and then consciousness kind of pulls us up.
I agree with you. That maybe that's a hopeful place to end. I was thinking about this a few days ago, where I was like thinking about like everything that's happened since 2016. It's like just like the fascism that has happened and like things like this. It's like as fucked up as it has been, and as annoying as it has been from all corners of just people like wigging the fuck out. It's like, what if it actually had been what people said it was going to be? Like, there's no comparison. And I think that probably what we've seen, I hope, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, I think we're hopefully seeing like a positive immune response instead of the thing. Because like you can look at the 40s, it's like there was no immune response to that. And that's what happened. And now it's just like this annoying fucking phase of just like shit. But that's better than it, it totally taking hold.
Yeah, and I think these systems, we experience them, they outwore their purpose. And what we have had in the last really hard 8 years is starting to look at these systems and go, what are these for?
Yeah.
What do we do? Like the school system, like the
I love
medical
that.
system, all of these.
What
are we doing here? What is this
Yeah.
for? And we were never going to do that if the shit didn't hit the fan. We were never going to do that if we didn't see behind the curtain. And so now I feel like everyone's seen behind the curtain. I feel like we're just now starting to truly kind of come out of the trauma of the pandemic. Now, whether or not it's still going on, I don't know, but the trauma of that collapse.
It's a lot of trauma.
And start to go, okay, well, this shit's not working. This shit is for something. I used to love to say red pilled, and then it became a QAnon thing.
That became a thing. Yeah.
That was the worst thing about QAnon is it took so many good metaphors and just they ruined
the party. Yeah. Yeah.
They truly did. It used to be yeah.
Well, spiritual people are creative. We got to come up with new stuff.
No, I'm constantly having to like reinvent the vocabulary. But yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful purely based on people are becoming self-aware. They are waking up. I don't define waking up as believing in aliens or Arcturians or being able to channel your guides. I define it as being aware of like, how do I participate in this thing? You know, my projections, me understanding my projections and the way that I project my reality.
That's a good definition.
Is impacting the reality.
Yeah.
Me talking to aliens does not have a tremendous impact
Maybe
on
it does.
the reality. I mean, it's had a tremendous impact on podcasting for me, but
it probably has an effect on that level of reality, because I think that also even certainly in my experience, and the other thing is like I teach this stuff, so I interact with hundreds and hundreds of people who are all going through these experiences, and like the shit lines up. It's not that different from person to person. Right. The themes are consistent, and whether that's through cultural programming or whatever it is, it's like. It's like as a teacher, I can like reliably predict this is where you're at, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen next, and this is what you should not do. And it's pretty like cut and dry after a certain point of just observing so many people. And so I think as part of that, it's like even when we're talking about the realms of psychedelics or visions or dreams or quote unquote astral or things like this, it's like that stuff is a shared space as well. It's just like the internet. We're all interacting with that together. It's not just in your head. It's in everybody's head. Right. I think that's my view on it, at least.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So what we do in our own thinking even matters, thoughts are things. Look at the effect of mass acid consciousness in the 60s.
Yeah.
People were not all over the map on different places there. They were all having, I think, similar experiences and listening to Bob Dylan and being like, yeah, man, Dylan's really putting it down for the youth of today. The war's not where it's at, man. And they were like I can't, they were like all having the same experiences. And now it's like, now you do acid and it just feels like sleazy and wrong, it's like, cause it's like, even those spaces have been like colonized in strip mold, I think. Yeah. But
strip mold acid.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is like I've mentioned this before. It's like really tell a lot about a period of time by what drugs people were doing, and you can tap into how they were thinking by doing that drug. So like when I first started doing like psychedelics, I was like, oh, this is what all those hippies were on about, like, oh yeah, like didgeridoo probably does sound good now, like that type of thing. But then it's like I had an interesting experience where I was like at a bar watching Saturday Night Live and Saturday Night Fever, and like people dancing around in like leisure suits with medallions on their hairy chests and stuff like that, and just acting like ridiculous. And I was like, you know what? This actually probably made perfect sense on Quaaludes. This probably was like this, like, yeah. It was probably great on Quaaludes. They were sweating a lot, so they needed spandex. It's like,
Yeah,
they wanted to dance like Gumby.
The Mad Men era with alcohol.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I'm going to pee my pants. So.
Okay. Where can people find out more about you and your work and any podcasting plans you may or may not have?
So I'm about to start a new podcast. I'm not announcing what it's called yet or anything about it yet, but I have many abandoned projects on the internet. Awakening OD is my most recent. I still have a couple more episodes of that are going to come out allegedly. Before that, I did Soberish, which ended up just kind of being a live journal of me publicly starting to talk about this stuff. It's kind of cringy that any of the older stuff is out there because I feel like I've jumped a million timelines. Since then, if you go to jessareed.com, you can keep up with stuff I'm doing. I sometimes do sessions. I have a Patreon. I have stuff, that I should probably just delete. But I think that Jessa Reed Comedy on Instagram, I deactivate that account on a regular basis. Jessa Reed on TikTok. I just was trying to start making TikToks. I don't like the energy of that app.
Yeah.
I don't have time to get into it, but yeah, it feels like the metaverse. It feels like people are being forced to make TikToks. Is the energy?
Nobody is going to force me to do funny dances. God damn it, ever.
We did it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on a live podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right.